bullet is fired directly into a wooden block, sending it straight up. How can we find the initial momentum, the final momentum, the loss in momentum, and how can we find the initial kinetic energy, the final kinetic energy, and the loss in kinetic energy? In this situation, we're assuming that gravity is negligible while the bullet is traveling from the rifle to the block. All objects move on one axis. The wooden block's kinetic energy after impact is equal to its maximum gravitational energy. Air resistance is negligible, and no wood is removed from the block upon impact. The bullet used in this experiment is a 38 grain, .22 long rifle round. The mass of this bullet can be researched online. The .22 long rifle round has a muzzle speed that can be researched online. We can roughly estimate the size of the block based on its surroundings to find length, width, and height. At this point, we can multiply these to find the volume, and then multiply that by the wood's density to find mass. We can see two nails in the block that contribute to the mass, so we add their mass to the mass of the wood. The block is not initially moving, so it has no initial velocity. We can estimate the distance that the wood block rises into the air. Assuming no air resistance, the max potential energy is equal to the max kinetic energy. We can use the formulas for maximum gravitational energy and maximum kinetic energy and rearrange for velocity to find our final velocity after the bullet hits the block. Since we have the bullet's mass and initial velocity, to solve for initial momentum, we can use the formula momentum is equal to mass times velocity. Since the block is not initially moving, it has no initial momentum. To find total initial momentum, we add the initial momentum of each object. Since the bullet and the block become one object after the collision, we can use the formula mass 1 plus mass 2 times final velocity is equal to total final momentum. To find the amount of momentum lost, we subtract the total final momentum from the total initial momentum. To get the percent of momentum lost, we divide the amount lost by the total initial momentum. Since we already know the mass and velocity, we can use the kinetic energy formula to solve for the bullet's initial kinetic energy. Since the block is not initially moving, it has no initial kinetic energy. To find the total initial kinetic energy, all we need to do is add the initial kinetic energy of each object. Since the wood block and the bullet become one object after the collision, we can use the kinetic energy formula to solve for the final total kinetic energy. To find the loss in kinetic energy, we can subtract the total final kinetic energy from the total initial kinetic energy. To find the kinetic energy loss as a percentage, we divide the amount lost by the total initial amount. This collision is more like an inelastic collision because the two objects stick together and lots of kinetic energy is lost.